So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is forcing public school athletes to wear COVID ankle bracelets. That's right. Public school athletes have to wear ankle bracelets in the state of Washington, not Washington, D.C., the state of Washington. The devices were purchased with funds from the American Rescue Plan. That was one of the stimulus bills that passed. And the plan says, that particular stimulus bill, it requires that 20% of that money go to elementary and secondary public school disaster relief fund. So the schools in Washington state, at least one district in particular, decided what were they going to use the money for? Well, they could have used it for, I don't know, private tutors. They could have used it for private vouchers to send kids to schools that were more appropriate during this COVID emergency. They could have used it for all kinds of things. Oh, they used it for ankle bracelets for athletes. That's what they decided to do. So we actually have a little bit of story on this. But before we do, the superintendent of public schools of this particular public school system, he had a statement. And the statement, of course, he wouldn't say it himself. He just sent the statement to the news station, and the news station read the statement. We have that clip of his statement explaining why he's doing this, and here it is.
He says we received grant funding that specifically included provisions to support higher risk athletic programs. And we used some of those funds to pay for athletic proximity monitors. We are using these monitors for high contact and moderate indoor contact sports. The monitors are for both staff, coaches, and students on the field, regardless if they are vaccinated or unvaccinated. If a student or coach tests positive, we will have immediate information regarding athletes and coaches and contacts so we can more tightly determine who might need to quarantine.
So your child's playing football, your child is wrestling, your child's playing soccer or basketball. Your child has to wear this ankle bracelet to let them know where he is and who he is in contact with, which, by the way, is pretty much everybody on the team because he's playing a sport, which in and of itself is stupid. Thoughts on this, Brian?
It already reminds me of The Longest Yard with Burt Reynolds. You know, when all the inmates were out there playing the guards, and they had to keep them corralled with guns. But in this case, all they would have needed was some COVID bracelets. It would have saved a lot more money because then you could watch them. And I actually feel bad on several levels for the athletes. But you know, when you're in high school, one of the best things to do is like sneak out or whatever and hang out with a teammate or whatever. These guys can't go anywhere because they're being monitored the whole time. It's almost like these guys are almost in a zoo. It's almost like a chain gang at this point where you can't go anywhere without somebody watching where you are.
And Matt, where are the parents at on this?
Yeah.
I mean, how much freedom are you willing to give up to play a sport in high school? I mean, this is just completely not fair for these kids. And I tell you, it's absolutely ludicrous that people in education are pushing this. First of all, they got a grant. The way I'm thinking how government works is, you know, they got a grant. We had to spend it on something. I'm going to virtual signal to everybody that I'm going to contact trace my way out of this by putting ankle bracelet. Has a country, a state, a city, anywhere in the world contact trace their way out of COVID?
I don't know, but why don't we just put the bracelets around people's necks like they do in some of these sci-fi films, It's like
or maybe one of those cones like the dogs you get, like your dog cone.
Yeah, the cone of silence from Get Smart.
What's the excuse we get about the border all the time about illegal immigration? Well, we catch and release them, but they're supposed to come back to court, but we can't find them. So if that's the case, why don't we just use these bracelets for that? Everybody that comes
great
across
idea.
Let's put that bracelet on. We can find your real.
So let me get this straight. We're putting ankle bracelets on athletes in public schools to make sure that when they get in contact with other athletes that have COVID, whether they were vaccinated or not, we want to know who they have been in contact with. But your idea is let's just reallocate those instead to the people coming across the border and saying, "Hi, sir, welcome to America. We're putting a bracelet on you." And then we'll know where you are.
And it is important because they said that 40% of the cases in Texas were from people that had just recently illegally come across the border. So if they really care about the spreading of the virus, then why not put them on there? Because obviously you can buy a lot of them if with this money.
Look, we're all Republicans here. I mean, we have a very
conservatives,
right? Yeah. That's a better label. Cavalier way of looking at COVID. Some of this stuff is just out of our control, and this is the situation that we're in. But imagine if 40% of the people that are crossing illegally across the border was coming with something like Ebola or something like way more deadly.
Well, they certainly had COVID, I'm pretty sure, 40%.
And this is just a colossal collapse by the Biden administration down there, and just really in society, and tells you where they're willing to, we have people in this society willing to like ankle monitor students, and that's okay, perfectly acceptable. But they're the same ones that say, you can't ask an ID to vote. You can't put the same requirement on someone here.
But we can contact trace your child.
What are we doing? Yeah. Like where does this end in society?
But we need to know where the 15-year-old wide receiver from Washington is.
Yeah, exactly.
At all times.
Because he talked to 3 people that might have it. Even though, statistically speaking, it doesn't really affect kids.
How about if that 15-year-old wide receiver, the contact tracer from the public school goes, all right, so we found out that you were playing football, in practice, and we had the contact tracer because you now have been in contact with someone with COVID. And the contact tracer says you were under the bleachers. What were you doing under the bleachers for an hour?
If I was a Washington State athlete, the first thing I would do is go to my coach and say, listen, I haven't told anybody this, but I'm an illegal.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They'll take that bracelet right off.
So get this, in the Daily Mail, this made it all the way across the pond to England. It says Washington school is blasted for making students wear ankle monitors so they can be alerted if another player tests positive for COVID. Eatonville High School has received backlash after implementing a measure in which athletes have to wear ankle monitors tracing COVID-19. And so it just goes on to talk about the school principal, the superintendent, and so forth. And of course, a bunch of parents naturally have weighed in, and they're not happy about it, of course, and they've pushed back. One parent said, over my dead body, my kids will not participate and very well may take them out of school and do online schooling if I have kids in that school. So when we do the Dumbest Bill in America, guys, and we do in the Dumbest Bill in America podcast listeners, it really is based on a bill. And this is the American Rescue Plan stimulus bill that this bill was in. So when you are superficial about bills and you say to people, oh, you know what? That's a good bill because it's a stimulus bill. It's going to stimulate the economy. Well, guess what? The bills are so big now. They have this stuff in them that gives discretion to school districts to do really bad and creepy things. Thoughts? Brian? He's speechless.
I am speechless because
he's thinking about how much trouble you'd be in if you were contact traced in high school.
But you're right. Everybody gets a little bit of candy with these bills now, and it's all about buying power and buying votes. And they figure out it's all a calculated decision that they're making. This is what we can do for you to make sure that you stay in power, and this is what we can do for you. But they're using the producers of this country's money. And the producers of the future. If you don't have any money, you can't pay anything back. I'm sorry, you just can't. If you're not producing a good or a service, you can't pay anything back. Your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are going to have to, because eventually it all has to get paid back. And it's the most selfish act in the world to continue to print money and give it out to people like it's nothing and expect that it's not going to have a negative result down the road, because it will.
I mean, contact tracers on many of these individuals coming in from Afghanistan, I think wouldn't be a bad idea. And of course, a lot of podcast listeners are going, well, that's really extreme. I mean, they're trying to flee. Well, we actually don't know who these people are. We're in such a hurry putting, 800 of them in a big aircraft, carrier or flight, I should say, at a time. We're in such a hurry to do that. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they believe. We don't know if they share our values. We don't know if they're going to share our values. We don't know if they're going to turn into terrorists or if they really were terrorists already. I mean, it's just exactly what you said, Brian, about people crossing the border. And it's not that we don't want people coming to America and wanting this opportunity, but everything is upside down. We're allowing people in the country with COVID. We're allowing people in the country that don't share our values. We don't even know who half of them are, I'm sure. And yet we're contact tracing and putting bracelets that are monitoring teenagers.
What we do know is the Cubans vote overwhelmingly Republican or conservative. So what have we done with them? No, you stay home. We're not coming to get you. But we will do everything to keep you out. Do not show up in South Florida because you might change the Florida vote. So you guys stay there. But we'll take the Afghanistan people who we have no idea who they are. But the calculation, once again, is they will vote Democrat.
Of course they will. And the same thing is with Eastern Europeans, the former Soviet bloc countries. we don't allow a lot of Eastern Europeans into the United States because when they get here, trust me, I know a bunch of them. I have a bunch of them in my district. In fact, they vote Republican because they lived under communism. They have grandparents and parents who lived under communism, and some of them themselves lived under communism because it really wasn't that long ago. And they want nothing to do with the agenda of the Democrat Party. Matt, final thoughts on dumbest bill in America?
Well, again, it's one of the dumbest ideas in America. I mean, I'm just wondering at what point are the American public going to sit there and say, you know what, we've given up enough freedoms.
Right.
Enough is enough. We're now on day 530 of 15 days of flattening the curve. Right. And people, we get this discussion all the time because you didn't know what COVID was at the beginning of this. So, I mean, yeah, shut down, try to figure things out. And there was an end point. This looks never ending at this point.
And I agree. And as far as I'm concerned, Matt, we still don't know what COVID is because the Chinese haven't come clean to us as to whether this is a weapon or whether this is something else. And if it's a weapon and the weapon keeps morphing into something that can eventually kill us and gets worse and worse over time, then you know what? It's about damn time our government tells us that it's a weapon, in which case maybe more people will be amenable to these kinds of things. I don't think I would ever, but you know what I'm saying.
Whatever happened, I mean, this is a philosophical difference between the two parties right now, where people like us are sitting there like, well, we need to have the information, be transparent, and we'll make my own informed decisions. We believe in treating people as adults. The other side just thinks you're an idiot.
Right.
You're a moron. And you're going to do what we're telling you. If
wear an ankle bracelet.
Yes. Right. If you don't do what we're going to tell you, we're going to come up with a new innovative way of making your life miserable. Yes. We're going to make you test every day, once a week. We're going to hold your kid out of school. You're not going to be able to go to restaurants. And apparently, if your kid wants to participate, they're going to have to wear an ankle bracelet. So at what point do people say, you know what? Enough is enough. We've given you a shot. You've lied to us almost every step of the way here.
You see that blooming up throughout the world, and you also see it here because you can only steal people's freedoms for so long before they're going to start to fight back, and they're starting to fight back. But that's why the media feels like their power is we're going to villainize you, no matter what. If you don't listen to us, we're going to villainize. Because if Matt Morgan comes out and says, "I'm not putting up with this. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not." Eventually, more and more people are going to start to stand next to Matt Morgan and say, "You're right. Let's do this together." But if they can isolate Matt Morgan and make you look like a fool, that's where their power comes from. But I do believe it's starting to well up in many people that we're not putting up with this anymore.
And
final thoughts here.
Well, this is a big deal because we're looking at vaccine passports and mask mandates for schools.
Yes,
and it's an important point. There is. It's not to me. It's not about masks. It's not about vaccines because I'm a big proponent of masks and vaccines. If you want to wear a mask, go for it. I think you should have the right to do that. If you want a vaccine, you want 1, 2, 3, 4, go for it. Yep. I'm all for it. Whatever you think makes you feel the most safe. The problem comes in is using these heavy-handed tactics by the government. What are you willing to do when we're talking about cutting people off from society? Are we talking about putting a officer at the local grocery store that you can't get in unless you have a vaccine passport? Are you talking about arresting people and forcibly giving them injections? Right. I mean, I don't know if we're really that far away from that. You start asking these questions like, "Oh, that's crazy. You're a bunch of crazy people."
That's good.
Well, I'm not sure we're that far away from it. It's very scary.
And that's a good way to end it. And I have to say this: this bill. This funding was hidden in the American Rescue Plan. And so we can only imagine what's being hidden in the Nancy Pelosi $4.5 trillion spending bill that's going to also try to be very Stalinist in our lives and try to take over our lives. In any event, that is the dumbest bill in America, forcing public school athletes to wear COVID ankle bracelets.